This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for anyone who loves learning and wants to explore their creativity and learn new skills. Skillshare offers a variety of classes, not just in the field of creativity, but also in many other subjects such as wellness, exercise, and even cooking. Skillshare is commercial free, so you get to really focus on learning a new skill without any distractions, and their entire catalog is now available with subtitles in Spanish, French, Portuguese, and German. The most recent class which caught my attention was Papercraft Art, a cutting-edge guide to paper illustration by Laura K. Sayers. I've always loved dabbling and learning about different mediums to illustrate and bring your imagination to life, and just from the first look, I was drawn to how whimsical this paper craft could be. I've always seen the medium as intimidating, but once I watched this class and how Laura broke down the steps, it became much more approachable. I enjoyed the exercises she included to practice the technicalities of it and how she really urges you to illustrate from imagination to make your art personal to you while being very relaxed about the execution. While watching this class, I really felt like this is something that a lot of you guys would be interested in, so if you want to check this class out along with so many others, you can head down to my description box where the first 1,000 people to click the link will get a month free trial of Skillshare. Invest in yourself and your personal growth with Skillshare. Hi everyone, this is Nia and today I'm going to be painting a bonsai tree. As you guys know, I love painting plants and trees in general, so I decided to paint one in a pot. I know that there are a lot of different types and styles of bonsai, so I decided to go through Pinterest first to get some ideas before I painted this one. By looking through some of these pictures, I realized that there are so many ways to bonsai your trees. And there are also different growing or slanting styles you can have. So I went through a few and just looked for the ones that I like. While looking through the photos, I also had a look at the pots as well, but I didn't want to use a full reference. Instead, I want to paint something from imagination. So I just took a basic idea of what I like about certain trees that I see to make my own interpretation, and you can also adjust yours to your liking. Personally, I really like the S or the wiggly style of the tree, and I also want my pot to be simple and rectangular so it's easier to draw out. Since I knew I liked the S shape, I tried to look for more images of the shapes that I like, anything that will give me inspiration for the shape of my tree. Once I'm done, personally, I did a few thumbnail sketches so I can figure out how many slants I want to include in my composition. Then I sketch it out with pencil very lightly to make sure I like how the painting will be framed with the space of paper that I have. When I was looking through the references, I came across mini bonsai plants as well, of flowers or maybe just a twig of berries growing out of a rock with moss, and I thought they were so cute, so if you guys are interested, that might be something that I'll try out in the future. Anyway, getting back to the tree, I started out by drawing the main S shape of the main tree trunk, and then I created further S shapes or curved branches branching from the left and the right of where the tree trunk is protruding outwards. I tried to make the lines as flowy as possible, so I tried drawing out a few small branches as well, so that will just help guide me as I paint later on. This is not too overly accurate as a sketch though, since I'll still be adding on some smaller branches freehand when I paint later on, just to make sure I can adjust everything with the condition of the painting and with how I've placed the leaves later on. For the leaves, I just drew out very light ruffles to group and clump them together in a shape that I like. And I also tried to figure out which clump of leaves are in front or behind the branches so I can play with the depth of the painting as well. I tried to also play around with a stylized root formation underneath the tree just so the bottom is not too boring. And then after that, I just add on the pot, which I decided to just use this rectangular shape with slightly curved sides to stylize it a bit, and I also added a couple of short stands so it's slightly above the surface. So that's pretty much it for the sketch. Next I'll go over the colors that I'll be using. Firstly, this is Payne's Grey Bluish by Schmincke, Burnt Umber by Holbein, Hansa Yellow Medium by Daniel Smith, Sap Green by Holbein, and Crimson Lake by Holbein. I'll also be using bleed proof white, but this is optional. I'm only going to use this for corrections later on. Like my usual plant paintings or my tree paintings, I like to begin by creating a light yellow-green color from a mixture of Hansa yellow and sap green. I like to create random dots with the tip of my brush while playing with the angle and also pressure to keep the edges nice and uneven. I also want to play around with the consistency of paint for some areas, so parts might be lighter than others. I'm painting in clumps that I've drawn out separately, and to keep it separate, I try to leave out a little bit of white space in between each clump to make sure that the paint doesn't blend into each other, which will turn it into a giant silhouette instead. So to keep that from happening, I want to make sure that the load on my brush is fairly light, so I'm not creating too much of a puddly surface. So once I finish painting the light yellow-green color for all the clumps, I'm going to follow this up by mixing a slightly more green color using the same mix, but I'm going to use more sap green this time. As you can see, the green is a little bit more vivid now and it has less yellow. I'm going to treat this the same way, so I'm applying it with the tip of my brush while playing with the pressure. I like to also sometimes mix in and just dot in an even darker green mix while the surface is still wet, just to get a little bit of color variation. So for the even darker green, I added a little bit of Payne's Gray Bluish and Burnt Umber. Burnt Umber will make the green look a bit more earthy, and the Payne's Gray Bluish will make it more of a deep green color. While applying the darker greens this time though, I do want to leave out some lighter colors, especially at the top, so I tried to add the darker colors or just dot it while the surface is still wet for the bottom portion of each clump, and I tried to leave a little bit of the really light green at the top or just use a really light consistency so the yellow green doesn't disappear completely. What I'm trying to do here is to add more depth and form to each of the clump so they look a little bit more three-dimensional and separated. So from here on, I'm just going to keep layering on more of the paint as I did for the top portion of the tree. Once I have good coverage for the leaves, I'm going to move on to paint the branches and the tree trunk. For this, I'm going to use the Burnt Umber as my main color, and then I'm going to adjust by adding Hansa Yellow if I want the color to be a bit brighter, and if I want the color or the brown to be more rich but less muted, I would add more Crimson Lake in the mix. I'm going to use this to paint the base color of the tree trunk, and as I get towards the really fine branches, I try to use the tip of my brush and I try to use quite a thick consistency so the color is a bit more prominent and stronger for those small areas. You can also switch to a smaller brush for this if it makes it a bit easier to control. But as for the application, though I want the shapes to be fairly flowy, I think to make the texture more realistic for the finer branches, they tend to be more snappy with more edges. So I tried painting it by separating the lines and making them shorter to make a slightly more jagged edge to the fine branches. So what I mean by this is, instead of drawing one flowy line, I tried to create short angled lines instead. As I was painting this, I also wanted to adjust the thickness of the main tree trunk. I felt like it was looking a bit too thick in comparison to the rest of the branches, so I just color in or paint on a smaller area, and then I'm just going to erase the rest of the pencil marks later on. Once I'm done painting the branches, I want to completely dry everything off. I'm just going to use a hair dryer here so I can erase off the wrong pencil marks. Here I'm going to adjust the color of the leaves and also to adjust the contrast in value. So I'm using the same mixes as before, and I'm going to do this back and forth as I build upon other elements as well. Next, I'm mixing a dark brown by using burnt umber with Payne's gray bluish. I'm using a fairly thick consistency, and I'm going to add really fine branches using this really dark brown. So even if I paint really fine branches, those very thin lines are still going to show through. I also want to add loose branches on the leafy areas, so it looks like some branches are popping out, and this will just add a bit more depth and detail to your painting. For the soil, I want to add a little bit of moss, so I use the leafy color again, and I just dot using my brush vertically, and I'm trying to create sort of like a small grassy texture. While I was doing this, I was thinking of a portion of moss and also soil, so I will be using a brown mix as well. But as a suggestion, I find that just the green of the moss would look better in comparison to the green with a little bit of the soil, because I find that the browns ended up muddying the greens as well, and it just doesn't look as lush. It's a bit too late for me to fix it, but if you're going to paint your own, that's what I would suggest. So please ignore this part where I'm actually painting on the browns. Here I want to make sure the corners are clean, which is why I'm painting them first. So if you want to paint the moss fully, I would suggest for you to use a bright green instead of this brown. Once I'm done painting the soil, I'm going to go back to the now dried tree trunks. I'm going to go back in with a slightly darker brown, and I want to add on the textures. I'm painting the left side first because I want the left side to be a bit darker just for a bit of shadow. And after that, I'm going to go back in with a slightly thinner consistency, and I'm going to add on the texture of the bark by creating uneven jagged lines. So for the shadow on the left side, I use a slightly darker brown, and as for the texture, I use a lighter brown, so it's a little bit more subtle. To add a bit more depth to the branches, I also want to alternate the values slightly, so I also added a slightly darker brown for some of the branches while leaving out others with the base brown color, which is a bit lighter. Moving on to the pot now, it's up to you what color you want to make yours. I personally want to make mine sort of like a muted red, something close to a maroon. So I used a mixture of Crimson Lake with Payne's Grey Bluish and also a bit of Burnt Umber. To separate the rim from the side of the pot, I do want to make the rim slightly darker. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the side of the rim first, and I'm going to paint the top of the rim using the same red mix. Then once I'm done, I'm going to dry everything off first, so when I add on a different color, it won't travel across the wet surface. For a slightly darker red, I added more Payne's Grey Bluish in the mix, and I also used a slightly thicker consistency. For the bottom parts of the pot, I'm also going to use the same dark red. Still using the same color, I'm going to add a bit of a lift for the back of the pot to make it more three-dimensional. Now I want to add a bit of dimension or shadow for the left side of the pot. I'm using the same first mix of the red, so this is a medium consistency of Crimson Lake with a bit of Payne's Grey Bluish and Burnt Umber, and I'm just going to paint the top side and blend the color slightly using a clean damp brush. Next, I'm going to add a bit of cast shadow. I just basically used the same brown mix as the tree trunks, but I added a little bit of Payne's Grey Bluish. I'm just using a very thin consistency here, and I also used a thin consistency of the red from the pot, and I just dotted randomly on the wet surface. Once I'm done, I'm going to add more of the shadow color right underneath the pot. So there's going to be a slight shift in value where the darker value is closer to the pot, and there's a gradual change to a lighter value as the shadow moves away from the pot. Okay, so we pretty much painted all the elements already. I just want to go back in to fix the depth of the leaf, so I added darker greens in certain areas to separate the clumps further, and I use a medium consistency of a mid-tone green just to add some loose leaves around the thinner branches and also more texture on the sides of the green rays, and I just find that this will make the tree look a bit lighter and wispy. Here I use my bleed proof white to try to fix a bit of the soil situation. I really don't like how muddy the bottom looks, but it was a bit too late and I didn't want to overcorrect using too much white, so I only used a bit. But that's why I said that this color was optional, as it's only to fix a bit of my mistake and to just give a white base to add a bit more green. So if you don't have bleed proof white, that's completely fine. Everything from here is just final adjustments to add texture or to increase the contrast in value, and that's pretty much it for this painting. Despite the mistake, I did enjoy painting and designing the shape of the bonsai tree. Like usual, all the list of tools as well as my social media links will be in my description box. I'll also have the outline available in my coffee shop. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye!